Hey, thank you very much for joining me today inside on this brisk fall rainy day. I appreciate you being here. Thank you very much. My name is Jeff Jones. This is Truth Be Told, and let's talk about how big your credit is getting. Financial credit is a two-edged sword, is it not? It can be a great benefit to anyone who uses it correctly. It also can be a terrible slave master to anyone who uses it incorrectly. And there are a lot of people who are enslaved to financial debt instead of living in the freedom that credit offers, because I think they don't understand how to use credit. I don't think they understand what the purpose of credit is all about. And so they misuse it and abuse it, and it ends up abusing them. Abram was credited as being right with God because he believed God, and then he acted like it. He acted like he believed God. God spoke to Abram audibly, and Abram then physically trusted God and walked the obedient walk to Canaan. God is still speaking today. He speaks through his word. He speaks through our consciences. Consciences, easier said than not. He speaks through our circumstances. He speaks through people, our pain, pleasure, dreams, pictures, all kinds of stuff. Are we listening? Let's be more specific. Do you really want to hear what God has to say? Do you really, really want to hear what God has to say about your life and how to live your life? I said last week that a lot of times we spend way more time pursuing the promise than we do the promiser, the provision more than we do the provider. And I think one reason for that is that we live by our senses. If we can attach one of our senses to God's promise or a promise of God becoming our reality, then we begin to feel better about the God that we can't see because he's not part of our senses. I mean, you can feel God, you can feel his presence, you can't see God, you can't touch God, but we can't see God, and that matters a lot to us. Too often, though, we live in a desperate attempt to sort of recreate God in our own likeness. If I can recreate God in my own likeness and my own understanding, there it is, my understanding. If I can make God a God that I can understand, I can manipulate this God. I can make him be anything I want him to be or do anything I want him to do, conform him, twist him, turn him into the shape that I want him to be. But therein lies the problem. God has never been and God will never be a God we can understand. We can't get our brains wrapped around him. We just can't. Isaiah 55 verses 8 and 9. For my thoughts, they're not your thoughts. Neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts. You can't comprehend me. Stop trying. It was Abram's faith that made him right with God, not his understanding of God, not even what God was asking of him. Here God was asking him to do something. There's no way he could understand it. But he walked anyway. It's the if-then principle that is applied here. If you are into computers much, you know, and in coding or tech work, you understand the if-then principle. It's the if-then principle of faith. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. If you trust in the Lord with all your heart, and if you don't depend on your own understanding, and if you seek God's will in all you do, then he will, that's a promise, he will show you which path to take or make your path straight. Matthew 6:33. If you seek first the kingdom of God and his righteousness first, then all these things that you need will be added to you. Remember the widow of Zarephath? That Elijah comes into town into Zarephath and meets this widow. And if the widow of Zarephath if she uses all of her oil and all of her flour to make Elijah this really wonderful pancake, then her oil and flour will never run out as long as the drought continues. If then. This is how our credit of righteousness grows and expands. When the way I live is based upon my credited righteousness instead of the culture I live in or the environment in which I live, my righteousness then begins to expand into more areas of my life and into others. A great example of this is when the Israelites were confronted with the flooded Jordan River. 470 years before they reach this river, and just on the other side of this river is the promised land that's been given to them by the promise of God through Abram. 470 years earlier, Abram has finally reached Canaan when God said, leave Haran. And God says to Abe, this is it. This is the place. Look around. Take it all in. It's all yours. It's here that I'll start the nation building process through you and Sarah. 470 years, give or take, after that conversation. Here, the children of Israel, Abram's offspring are 3+ million people are on the border of that promise. But for them to have what God has promised, they're going to have to exhibit the same faith that Abram did when God said, I want you to leave Haran and go to where I'll tell you later. What was normally about 100 feet across the Jordan River was now about a mile wide because of the snows melting off of Mount Hermon. God had miraculously parted the Red Sea for their parents, but now he was going to part the impassable Jordan River for their children, but only if they step into the water first, while it's flowing, while it's at flood stage, and trust God to make a way. Then God would part the river. Their righteousness would expand not only in their own lives, but in the nations around them, and ultimately to you and me. Every single time we step out in faith, every single time we step out in obedience without any assurance, no matter how big or small the decision to do right or make a decision to change careers, whatever it is, that we obey God, then even when our feet, we don't have any idea if the step we're taking is going to land on solid ground. Our credit expands in impact and influence in our own lives and in the lives around us. Look, if Abram believes God and he leaves the known for the unknown, if Abraham walks that excruciatingly painful journey to Mount Moriah and physically puts Isaac on the altar to be sacrificed, then God will provide a ram. Then. This isn't about understanding God. It's not about understanding God. It's not about understanding God's long-term plan for my life. This is the refinement process. This is the dying to self process. This is the becoming more like Christ process. Why? Because let's be honest, we don't die to ourselves very willingly or easily, but we soon discover that the mind of Christ doesn't share control of the mind of man very well. God doesn't share God doesn't put his hand on your hand that's on the tiller of your life as you're going through life. He gets full control. Period. End of story. Or your faith, credited righteousness, does not expand. It's the if-then principle, and it takes time and it takes repetition. Abram was credited with righteousness as with God because he believed God first, and then he acted like it. Repeatedly. We aren't given the credit of righteousness and salvation so that we can hoard the gifts of God. We're just not. God will sometimes ask us to step into the scary unknown. I'm going to tell you that there are too many Christians today that have this Americanized idea that their relationship with Christ and their righteousness with Christ is the same as their vote. It's a sacred vote, and it's just between me and the ballot. And that my faith is just between me and God and no one else. That's wrong. That's absolutely wrong. It's a terrible way to look at life and look at your faith. Next week, though, we're going to look at how devastatingly wrong that viewpoint is in getting into heaven. In addition to redemption, the purpose of our faith is to expand God's influence. Your purpose and my purpose in being credited with righteousness, as we step out in faith, we expand God's influence into the world around us as well as into more of our own lives. When we make decisions based upon our righteousness, we decide how to live according to our righteousness, whether it's our finances, spending time with God, our entertainment or our jobs, overcoming temptation, how we dress, how we think, how we speak. When we make the decision to act out of our faith in God through obedience, our credited righteousness expands both in this life and into the next. What you do here matters later on. Be assured, there will be times when God will test your faith and he will lead you into those freaky dark waters of, I don't think so. and I don't like it, and not a chance. I mean, he will lead us right out into the middle of it. There will be times when obeying God and walking this walk of obedience and faith and righteousness will cost you, and sometimes cost you dearly. I've been there. I am there now. But what did it cost Jesus in order that you and I might wear this robe and garment of righteousness? Too often we want the miracles of God without the walk of faith that the miracles require. Too many Christians are known for what they won't do because they're Christians. I don't drink or smoke or chew or run with women who do. That kind of thing's been around for a long time. There are also too many Christians who are known for what they're willing to do, because somebody told them at one point, if you'll just pray this magic little prayer, then you'll be saved and you don't have to really change anything. Just go about living your life. Both of these scenarios are dead wrong. Our accredited righteousness is not like a credit card, in one case to only be used in emergencies when things go wrong and all of a sudden we have faith in God. Please answer my prayer. Show us a miracle. Because then, if that's the case, then our lives become enslaved to the rules rather than the relationship of God. Our accredited righteousness is also not supposed to be used willy-nilly, where it loses its effectiveness. Again, we're going to talk more about that next week, so make sure you are here to see it. Living a life of active faith in God, living a life of active faith in God reveals more about who you are with than what you stand for or against. Abram showed who he was with when he believed God, and then he proved it by walking that lonely walk of obedience. What happened? Well, Abram believed God and started walking into the unknown. Expanded a little bit, his barren wife gave birth to a miracle son, Isaac. Expand a little bit more, Isaac produced Jacob. Jacob gave us the 12 sons, or 12 tribes of Israel, who then ultimately gave us approximately 3 million offspring going into the promised land. And this credit of righteousness that God gave to Abram grew in influence and impact in the nations around him until ultimately Galatians 3:8 says, the entire world will be blessed in Abraham. Look, you won't see it when it happens. Like, you don't feel your fingernails growing, but they grow. Every time you act in obedience because of your faith in Jesus Christ, your credit of righteousness expands and grows in your own life as well as in the lives of those around you. There will be times you will be misunderstood. You will be lied about. You will be taken for granted. But like Abraham was offering Isaac on the altar, you've got to choose to look beyond the moment, beyond the pain, beyond the suffering, beyond the perseverance. You've got to look beyond that and know that the effect of your credited righteousness isn't just expanding here, but also in the hereafter. And that's what we're going to look at next time when we see the final piece of God's credit structure fall into place. I hope your credit begins to grow and expand in ways you never could have imagined this week. Stay to the task. God is faithful. He will do it. Be well, my friend. Until next time. Bye-bye.